Welcome to the MindSolve podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan. The topic of this episode is intersectionality and the stress of exclusion. I'm delighted to interview my guest, my dear friend and alumni, Dr. Laura Lubin, who is an Associate Director of Faculty Support Academic Affairs. Dr. Laura, I am grateful to explore this topic with you as a Black Indigenous person of color, as a professional woman, as a good friend, as a published author, and many other things that you're going to get into here in a moment. I've had the pleasure of learning and studying with you over the many years as a colleague. And before we get into what we're going to cover today, which will include some high-level definition of intersectionality for our listeners and viewers, also with some high-level data points, I'd like for you to take a moment just to share with our subscribers and listeners a little bit about your background, go into your professional background, some of your accomplishments and responsibilities. So again, welcome, Dr. Laura.
I'm Dr. Abdullah. So I want to first thank you for the support and time that you've been so generous with over the years of our friendship. And then next, a sincere thanks for the opportunity to share my journey, especially since I find that too often minoritized narratives are not just excluded from platforms such as yours that are dedicated to mental health and life enhancement, but also from broader discussions in society. So it is heartening to be here and contribute to your consistent prioritization of amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard and discussing issues from a variety of perspectives. So, a bit more about me in relation to our topic today. I consider myself a progressive thinker, one who is focused on the place where wicked problems, the sociology of work, critical theory, Black feminism, Afrofuturism, and Sankofa as a lens meet. I am a professional and a researcher with over 17 years of experience dedicated to expanding educational access, driving educational excellence, and fostering partnerships with both internal and external stakeholders in the interest of both student and employee success. Because when employees of higher education institutions are successful, students receive the services that they need to be successful as well. And often HEIs do not acknowledge or give voice to the deep interconnection these two groups of individuals have on each other's respective successes. Um, Throughout my career, I've relentlessly championed innovation in the realms of academic affairs, program and project management, and specialized academic strategies. My journey is defined by a proven ability to cultivate responses to vital HEI needs, all while, as a female, first generation American of Afro Caribbean descent, I'm finding myself navigating a gambit of emotions from experiences that span the spectrum from surviving and coping to striving and thriving in the crucible of some of the most high stress, high stake, contentious, minoritized conversations of HEI, to include the development of online programs, the contributions of adjuncts to HEIs, which is often not spoken of, and the voices of workers. Right now, as the Associate Director of Faculty Support at the Kogod School of Business at American University, I am responsible for integrating unique research approaches, evaluative metrics, uh, in establishing best practices for faculty who are teaching, particularly our adjunct faculty who are teaching, engaging in curriculum in order for us to deliver high quality programs despite the operational challenges that come along with higher ed. I supervise and continuously improve faculty training. I manage curriculum refinement. I aid faculty in course production, revision, iteration, and also balance long term university goals, right? So for me, at one point in time, I used to refer to myself as an instructional designer by trade,
Mm-hmm.
but that has evolved to where I now characterize myself as a pracademic, which captures my third space professional status. And what do I mean by third
Mm-hmm.
space professional, right? The resulting experiences of my professional roles in higher education bridge the academia and practice divide. And while, especially as a woman of color, this has undoubtedly assigned labels and stereotypes to my person, it has also allowed me to apply cutting edge research to real world challenges. It's a path that has supported my contribution to innovative strategies, to data driven solutions, and just the continuous pursuit of redefining the limited collaboration spaces
Mm-hmm.
of higher education. To kind of wrap this up, if I were to define a future for
Mm-hmm.
where this takes me, I would be intrigued by dismantling systemic inequities in higher education. And this would be in the interest of uncovering or unveiling innovative solutions that, in first, amplifying voices that deserve to
Mm-hmm.
be heard, right? And second, drawing new boundaries of what is possible for collaboration at higher ed. It should therefore come as no surprise to you or your
Mm-hmm.
listeners that I sometimes inadvertently and quite naturally gravitate to concepts central to intersectionality,
Mm-hmm.
which provides a frame for exploring how a person's group, various social identities really combine to create
Mm-hmm.
different modes of discrimination,
Mm-hmm.
privilege, and if I could be so bold to add, failures and successes in
Mm-hmm.
the professional spaces that we occupy. So, to kind of turn it back over to you, I am excited today to get into this conversation and to share my insights on intersectionality, gender, race, and the challenges faced by minoritized individuals in higher ed spaces, and to do so as the subject, right? And not the
Mm-hmm.
researcher, where I get to finally draw. Because, when you're doing research, you really want to focus on your subject. But now I
Mm-hmm.
get to be the subject and I get to draw from my experiences and professional expertise. So, again, thank you for having me today.
Wonderfully said. And given your voice as bringing a counter narrative to what the center narrative has been for so long in many professions, including yours as a professional educator, professional advocate, moving forward the efforts that to some seem radical, but
Right.
in truth, it's in order for us just to exist, to have space, right? To hold space and the stress that comes with that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
the lack of space,
Absolutely.
and sometimes deliberate lack of space. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
we'll be getting
Mm-hmm.
into it.
We will. We will. So thank you for that introduction. So here's what I want to do for our listeners, because this in the minds or listeners may feel like, whoa, this is really heavy. This is very technical. This is very research based, and you got two doctors talking. So let's bring it down to the kitchen table
Right.
level and make
Right.
sense of this. So what I do need to do first is define, as you and I know very well, when we write or publish anything, we need to define terms so that everyone can be sitting at the table at equal sitting and understand what's going on. Is the term intersectionality. And I'm going directly from Merriam-Webster's dictionary. So it's an easy resource that everybody can go to, although we know that this term comes from somewhere else that's deeper than that. So here's what it's defined as for our listeners. Uh, Intersectionality is defined as the complex, cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. This term was coined by the prestigious, well known law professor and published author Kimberly Crenshaw. Her work has informed both of our research and our work, so we
It
really
sure
appreciate her
has.
work.
Right.
She introduced the theory of intersectionality, which proposes that the idea that when it comes to thinking about inequalities, persist in categories such as gender, race, and class are best understood as overlapping and mutually constitutive rather than isolated and distinct. So no longer this isolation that you're experiencing exclusion or the stress of identifying as being a woman or a man or someone of racial minority group or ethnic group, but all of those intersect, right? And they have an overlaying effect in that we need to be able to work in a space of understanding and empathizing what that might mean. So that's really the essence of intersectionality, is that how those different identifiers intersect with one another, and how does that show up in your experiences, and what kind of stress that brings to life and the difficulties that may cause in any space, socially, professionally, educationally, and all those factors it shows up. So here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to take a few minutes here before we get into our interview and ask Dr. Laura to answer some questions from her experience. I'm going to talk about some high-level things that really speak to the experience of Black, Indigenous people of color pertaining to women. Okay, so we're really going to tune in, and I'm really delighted to be having this conversation with you, Dr. Laura, because I know that I've covered this from a man's standpoint through my doctoral research, but I've been longing for this opportunity to really speak to it and have a Black woman's voice being heard on this topic, which is a really important topic. So let's get right into it. So in this current year of 2023, the Society for Human Resource Management reported the following. So this is going to hit a couple of the points. 25% of Black women were denied a job for reasons related to their hairstyle. 66% changed their hairstyles just for a job interview, just to be able to show up to interview for the job. Nothing to do with their qualifications, just their hair. 41% of Black women change or straighten their hair according to the need to comply with their counterparts, Hispanic or white women. As it states, they are 54% more likely than Hispanic or white women to have to straighten their naturally curly hair for interviews. Furthermore, the Crown study revealed, which is all about the hair, the Crown study, revealed that Black women are more likely to experience microaggressions in response to their natural hair. And 20% of Black women ages 25 to 34 have experienced the stress of being sent home from work due to their hairstyles. Let me repeat that. 25 to 34 years of age, these are adult women, Black women, being sent home from work because of their hairstyles. It's really disturbing. It's a chilling effect to hear that, right? It's an injustice. Now, furthermore, in the same year, current year, 2023, the State of Black of America reported that Black women are more than 3 times as likely to be unemployed as white women, although Black women are now leaders in achieving higher education, post-secondary education, bachelor's, master's, doctoral degrees in all professions, right? Black women are showing up in a way representing some of the finest, most educated people in our community, but yet still struggling more than 3 times to be unemployed to their white women counterparts. And in 2022, the Harvard Business Review article entitled "How Black Women Can Navigate Pay Gap Gaslighting" reports that Black women make 58 cents for every dollar by an average white man in the U.S., according to the U.S. Census data. And this is costing Black women, who are in many cases, primary providers for their families, comparatively over time, a $900,000 disparity over a span of a 40-year career. So imagine that. You've got a Black woman professional who's educated, who's capable, who's productive, who's effective, who's intelligent, has all the capabilities to do very well, just as well as anyone else in their profession, over a full career, not able to keep pace with their white male counterpart to pass on assets to the next generation, to create a dream, the American dream of homeownership, the way that their white male counterparts may be able to attain. So these are real data points that stand out to me as a researcher, as a professional, as a mental health professional working with all client types, including Black women, that's concerning. And we need to raise the awareness. And given that these conditions are still persisting as recently as this year, we've got a lot of work ahead of us. So, with all that being said, here's where I want to transition with Dr. Laura. And we have some questions for you, Dr. Laura. I want to have you first start with just opening up and talking through the way in which your role in terms of gender and race play into your own self-identification. How do you, what does that mean for you to speak to that as a Black, Indigenous person of color, as a woman, both personally and professionally? So let's hear from you on that topic.
Right. So in research, we would call this our positionality, right? Where we stand in relation to what it is that is under study. In this case, as the subject, I can speak to the fact that my gender and race are inseparable from my identity. Personally, they are sources and representations of not only my strength and my resilience, but those of my ancestors. See, my mother is of Bahamian descent and my father is of Haitian descent. And there's no erasure of Black history that can make the world forget that the Haitian Revolution of 1791 to 1804 is one of the only instances where enslaved and free people of color fought the French, the Spanish, and the British for self-liberation. That type of strength, that type of resilience, that level of tenacity and boldness, it becomes imprinted on your very DNA. It's my inheritance. So professionally speaking, my gender, my race, and my heritage has shaped my commitment to dismantling these systemic barriers and advocating for the inclusion of voices that are so often marginalized in higher education. And let me expand on that a bit. Gender and race have profound implications, as you have stated with the data that you've offered to kind of level set this conversation for anyone who's listening on how people identify themselves, but also how others perceive you too. And I think a lot of times we ignore that side of it, but yet that is a main contributor to some of the experiences that Black women are having in higher education spaces. I started to speak earlier regarding the assignments of labels and stereotypes. And there's no doubt that being of Haitian descent has come with implications, both in my personal and professional life. Let's talk about our past president, Donald Trump. He called Haiti a whole country, right? So to expand on the personal aspect of this, as a female of Afro-Caribbean descent, my gender and racial identity have shaped my sense of self and my sense of place in the world. It has instilled a strong sense of cultural pride and a deep connection to the experience and histories of my heritage. As someone who identifies as a woman of color, and this identity definitely influences my worldview, right? My relationships. It also determines some of the decisions that I make when I'm navigating both the societal and the personal and the professional challenges. As an academic and as a researcher dedicated to educational access and excellence and unashamedly Black excellence, as a woman of color in academia, I'm acutely aware of the underrepresentation of individuals with backgrounds that are similar to mine. And this awareness fuels my intrigue, again, in dismantling those systemic inequities. My identity also informs my research, my approach to problem solving, my dedication to fostering inclusivity and diversity within the institutions I work with now and the ones that I've worked with in the past. It also drives a passion for amplifying underrepresented voices, which are going unheard, going unacknowledged. And that's, I want to say that was part of the conversation that happened in that Harvard Business Review article that you referred to earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So in my role as a academic, I want to bridge the gap again between those academic theories and these practical solutions and apply my unique perspective to address complex challenges, which is what intersectionality is all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
That these are complex things that are faced by minoritized individuals. Um, and so when I speak to both my professional and personal life, my gender and race serves as sources of motivation.
Mm,
It serves as ambition, and it creates a commitment to promoting equity. Like, if I don't promote it, who will?
mm,
Right? Our allyship, as much as we want to say, let's call on our allies, it's not as widespread and available as folks would
mm.
come to believe. And so these are integral aspects of my identity that kind of shape how I navigate my world. To close my response to the question, allow me to revisit also my earlier comment about the underrepresentation of individuals with backgrounds similar to mine, especially in the context of higher ed. There was no prouder moment I could have had than virtually witnessing the inaugural address of Dr. Claudine Gay in
Mm,
response to her ascendance to the presidency of Harvard University, right?
mm,
Her achievement singularly represents a significant milestone for individuals with backgrounds similar to mine. To see her sitting in a seat in one of the most elite, renowned educational institutions in the world sends a powerful message of possibility and inclusivity. And it's really a testament to the transformative power of diversity and the potential for individuals from underrepresented backgrounds to not only break barriers and crack ceilings, but to redefine those boundaries and to inspire change on a grand scale. Dr. Claudine Gay's journey is not just her own,
mhm,
right? It's a beacon of hope for all of us
mm.
who dare to dream beyond the limits that are imposed upon us by traditional norms. And it reminds us that diverse perspectives and experiences truly enrich the fabric of academia and our society at large.
Wow. I couldn't have imagined a better answer to that question. And you just speaking from a space of just pure authenticity of what I know about you and who you are. So let's build on that. I want you to go a little deeper, even, and speak to just some of the experiences of exclusion you've had to face educationally and professionally in environments that you've had to navigate based on the fact that you said it's interlinked, your gender and your race and your heritage, and that inheritance of your rich cultural background of survivorship and advancement. All of that comes to bear. Talk
Mhm.
about some of those exclusion experiences, because what I know as a mental health professional is that exclusion is a major stressor that knocks a lot of people of color out of their window of tolerance to
Right.
the effects of chronic stress, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, or just giving up altogether. And it takes a lot to wake up every morning and to show up authentically who you are in these
Right.
spaces that choose to exclude you in many ways. So I want to turn it to you, Dr. Laura, to talk about some of those experiences.
Sure thing. I mean, to be honest with you, um, in both educational and professional environments, my personal um, identifiers, gender and race, right, have
Hmm.
regrettably exposed me to various forms of exclusion and challenges. Uh, these experiences have profoundly influenced my perspective of higher
Hmm.
education's work approaches and hierarchical imbalances.
Hmm.
Within educational settings, I've confronted microaggressions and
Hmm.
biases tied to my gender, my race, and my
Hmm.
heritage, and many times to my professional detriment. Um, so these subtle and often intentional, because a lot of folks would like to say, oh, it's unintentional. No,
Hmm.
no, 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 no. They're often intentional slights.
Hmm.
And actions, comments, just outright reputational assault and
Hmm.
slander have accumulated over time. and it fosters and perpetuates a sense of alienation and frustration and just like you said, this drive to just give it all up.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's hard to find your space, so therefore it's hard to find your worth. And at times I've experienced the disheartening sensation
Mm-hmm.
of being underestimated, overlooked. And that often stems from those preconceived notions
Mm-hmm.
associated with being a woman of color,
Mm.
right? Angry Black woman syndrome
Mm.
when you're being assertive. And these encounters have on occasion impeded my full engagement and contribution to academic discourse. And those moments, as I reflect on them, has led me into the spectrum of self doubt,
Mm.
self limitation, a lack of self assurance, a place characterized by, again, coping and survival.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, speaking to the Crown Act, I vividly recall the first time I received advice within higher ed
Mm-hmm.
that implied I would be more likable if I relaxed
Mm.
my natural hair.
Mm.
What makes this experience especially striking is that the advice came from a person of color,
Mm.
reminding me that exclusion is not perpetuated solely by those of Caucasian descent, but it can also manifest within our
Mm-hmm.
own communities
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps maybe through the systematic elements that have been built, have been designed to
Mm-hmm.
perpetuate within our communities. So, in my professional journey as a woman of color, I've been both an observer and a
Mm-hmm.
participant in the ongoing underrepresentation of individuals from, you know, like backgrounds like mine. And this underrepresentation extends beyond race, gender, heritage. It even encompasses the background of a third space professional because this is where, again, that fusion of academic and practical expertise is often overlooked. You're not quite the academic, you're not quite the practitioner. So you're
Mm.
just kind of on the margins.
Mm-hmm.
And this underrepresentation manifests in various ways. Again, the limited opportunities for leadership roles,
Mm-hmm.
uh, to the notable absence of diversity in decision making process. We're not at the table. These dynamics perpetuate those systemic inequities again, and it creates additional hurdles as if we don't have enough hurdles
Mm-hmm.
already,
Mm-hmm.
right? For individuals with diverse backgrounds to really thrive and have their voices valued. Additionally, I've encountered unique challenges associated with navigating the complex terrain of higher ed. And this includes even my advocacy for underrepresented voices
Mm.
and the promotion of inclusivities. At times, these efforts have been met with outright resistance or indifference from individuals who may not fully grasp the crucial and critical role that diversity plays in the
Mm-hmm.
academic world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, academia is supposed to be a space where you have debates, but if you're only having debates with yourself, what are you really debating?
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
So with these experiences of exclusion and again being disheartening, they have also fueled my unwavering resolve
Mm.
to say we've got to change this. And these challenges have reinforced the vital importance of just promoting diversity and inclusion, not only for the individuals directly affected, but for the enrichment and betterment of our educational and professional environments as a whole. These experiences underscore the pervasive nature of biases, the stereotypes that continue to affect and negatively impact women of color in academia and beyond, highlighting the pressing need for a shift of mindset and behavior, both on an individual level and within institutions, where we have to be intentional
Mm-hmm.
about fostering inclusivity,
Mm-hmm.
diversity, and equitable opportunities for everyone, regardless of their race, gender, or background. let's look at 2023, right?
Hmm.
2023 has been quite a year.
Oh, yes, it has.
We're looking at the removal of funding for DEI efforts happening
Hmm.
in states such as Florida and Texas.
Hmm.
Florida, my home state, is identified by the AAUP as ground zero for these exclusion
Hmm.
efforts. And quite frankly, we are facing an uphill battle, guys,
Hmm.
to ensure that diversity, inclusion, and the academic freedom to interrogate these new atrocities remain at the forefront of our educational and professional landscapes. That we are actively preventing the notions of exclusivity from regressing the fabric of our educational
Hmm.
and professional institutions as a whole. So, I believe that that's the beauty of lifting up the voices of those who find themselves being marginalized.
Hmm.
And again, their allies, right? When we lift those voices up, it spills over and results in setting a precedence or foundation to lift everyone's voices up. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, I love a couple of themes that came up for me when I'm listening to you speak to that question is this sense of personal advocacy, acknowledging that
Mm,
you have to be the advocate for self first and foremost, that intersectionality, understanding that how you identify how you show up for you is
right,
foremost important to really move forward, given the many constraints that are not the typical forms of classic bigotry or oppression or marginalization that's very in your face. It's more subtle, institutionalized, right? That
right,
there's roadblocks and barriers that you have to overcome. And so acknowledging that while also recognizing that there are many forces, like you mentioned, the states of Texas and Florida having some
right,
legislative changes that are making diversity inclusion initiatives evaporate or remove them, if you will, from academic and professional settings, so that people who are already faced with so many of these challenges that you've experienced and had to navigate are now running uphill with the wind in their face. So that's a
right,
really difficult proposition to have to accept, and acknowledging that you have to continue to move forward with those who are willing to be allies,
right,
and recognizing that allies come in many forms and identity. Because as you stated, you were getting that feedback on your crown of straightening your hair so that you could be more presentable and centered in a very white heteronormative environment, was what I'm assuming from that, versus that colleague or the associate simply advocating for you to say, Dr. Laura, you can still show up as you because you bring great value to the contributions you have to offer. And then I also love what you brought up about the third space, right? That you and I have had many conversations that we can
right,
probably count thousands of times. We've talked about this challenge that causes stress in academia, that, well, you're too much of a practitioner, or you're not enough of a practitioner, or you're not much of a researcher. You need to publish more. You need to, you're bending yourself into a pretzel trying to figure out how do you fit into your world. That's on top of the intersectionality of who you are, faced with trying to be included at the table, right? Being included as a valuable contributor and player in the game. So, really great thought. So, as our listeners are listening, my hope is that any listener who can sitting beside empathetic position with you, right? They can understand, like, oh, when I hear Dr. Laura speak to this, that resonates, that they're listening and gaining some momentum and some energy around their own personal advocacy, because advocating for self first is the first step.
It really is. And too often, JB, folks are so pushed into a corner
Mm-hmm.
that they don't even see how to make that happen.
Mm.
And if we can start, through therapy,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I am so proud of you. Like, not only did you go and get a doctorate, Black
Mm-hmm.
man, but you went
Mm-hmm.
back for a master's in
Mm-hmm.
order to be able to come back to your community and say, hey, here's a
Mm-hmm.
Black male clinician in
Mm-hmm.
psychology
Mm-hmm.
that can help you work through it. Because sometimes, you know, as much as we can sometimes hurt each other,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing like being loved on by each other too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there too, sir.
Yeah. I appreciate that. No, that's important. So here's where I want to go next. You've answered a few different questions in your response. So I'm going to go right to the next question, which is, you know, as you have overcome some of these acts of exclusion and marginalization, and you've got to where you are, talk a little bit about what that journey was like for you going through the doctoral experience, because I know how hard that is to navigate that. So, if speaking to as if you're talking directly to someone who's sitting at um, a placement of considering pursuing higher education, whether it be a master's degree, a doctoral degree, as a person who identifies as a Black, Indigenous person of color or different minority group, woman who's saying, I don't know if it's worth the investment or how hard that might
Right.
be or what that might look like. Talk about your journey. What are some of the challenges you faced? And then some of the ways in which you were able to overcome those challenges that might be relevant for them to hear.
Okay. All right. So, JB,
Mhm.
so you know that this was a 10-year bid. And one of the things that I love about us getting together is that we started at the same time and you
Mhm.
were able to finish not only your doctorate, but your master's before I was able to finish that EDD. But you want to know what? Part of that struggle, I think, has made me more aware of who I am.
Mm,
And so that's the first thing that I would tell folks. Don't expect your journey to look exactly the same if you're getting ready to pursue a doctorate.
mhm,
It's not. Your journey is going to be your journey, and you're going to own that space because, like we used to say, doctorate or death. You're
mhm,
making an investment in
mhm,
yourself, right?
mhm,
Um, so what motivated me to stick with it for 10 years? Number one, I felt like I had something to say. And
mm,
I felt like I had something to say that was not being said.
mhm,
And I met the challenges with a combination of strategies, not only aimed at achieving success, but also contributing again to dismantling of exclusionary systems within higher education. Um, and overcoming exclusion has required perseverance and building a strong, strong support network of sisters and brothers, and
mhm.
again, other allies. So, to kind of start, mentorship played a crucial role in my personal and professional growth when achieving the
Mhm.
doctorate. I'm going to specifically call out our dear mentor, Dr. Thomas G. Rio Jr. There's
Mhm.
no one better in terms of
Absolutely
having your
agree.
back.
Absolutely.
He is such an advocate
Mhm.
for people of color and their success, and in helping you to realize that yes, you are worthy and you can do it. Another mentor was Dr. Valentina Brookley of FIU again. um, I had Maureen Breslin. She was my first boss here at the Kogod School of Business. And at that time, when I was coming to Kogod, I was literally displaced from Florida because of many of the ideas and approaches that I had. And what Maureen was able to do for me was give me a space at Kogod, right? So you need people to create spaces for you, even within the doctoral program, to kind of reclaim your professional narrative. And that allowed me to continue pushing through the doctorate as well. So you need to find folks who are going to create space for your doctorate.
Absolutely.
Um, Seeking guidance and support from these individuals who, in their own way, have faced challenges and successes in higher education provided me with valuable insights, encouragement, that push. You know, sometimes I was so annoyed. Maureen would come, how's that doctorate going? Like, it's been going for the last 10 years. Like, what are we doing? But that encouragement really did push me because it now it now showed me now, like, I'm not just doing this for myself. There are other people who are behind me cheering me on, who want to see me do this, and they believe I can do it. Right? Um, wow. So their experiences, my experiences, within the doctoral pursuit illuminated potential paths to my success. And it bolstered my resilience in the face of that exclusion activity. Again, if there were other things that helped me to get through this process, I found joy in doing something that I had waited a very long time to do, and that was joining a sorority, right? So I joined a graduate chapter of the D9. So shout out to my sorors of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. And that group has connected me to other like minded women whom I can vent my frustrations to and celebrate my wins with, right? It went a long way to support shadow work because within the doctorate, while you're achieving it, yes, there's the academic side, but if you're going to be using your doctorate to confront yourself really in your own marginalization, there's some shadow work that gets done. And just to kind of elaborate on shadow work, it's a psychological and spiritual concept that involves exploring and acknowledging the hidden or the repressed or unexamined aspects of one's personality and your inner self. And these hidden aspects, often referred to as the shadow, Carl Jung, right? Typically consist of thoughts, the emotions, the desires, the ambitions, the behaviors that individuals have pushed into their unconscious mind because those thoughts, those emotions or desires are seen as unacceptable, undesirable, socially inappropriate. So that leads me to the next aspect of how I overcame acts of exclusion and marginalization to achieve this doctorate. It's been a journey of self-care. It's another vital component to overcoming. It's essential to prioritize your well-being as much as you can because this is a mental exercise. Make no mistake about it to complete the terminal degree. When I look at my experience, it was a decade of sacrificing sweat, tears, anxiety, you name it. I encountered it physically, mentally, and I did it while having to navigate the often stressful and demanding academic environment, not just as a student, but as an administrator. So when I talk about third spaces, like maybe I need to be like a fifth space professionally. You know what I'm saying? Because I had been a student for so long. It was just, I tell you. So self-care again, those practices have really helped me to build some resilience and maintain a focus, ensuring that that I was able to continue that drive, that push to pursuing my goals. And I'll tell folks, if you need a day out with the girls, take it. Those sick days that are just building up, that should you resign or be forced out of your position, that you'll never be paid for, by all means, take a sick day, folks. In the process of self-discovery and personal growth, that was the doctoral process. I would also add that I came to accept two important truths. And the first of these truths is my acknowledgement, again, that I am inherently valuable and deserving of self-care and well-being. I am worthy of care. There are times when you should either that you need to remove yourself from this idea of complacency or forgetting that if you stand for nothing, you'd fall for anything, right? Especially navigating higher education, because it will denigrate you at times to less than. And you must be prepared to flip that narrative or have someone around you to turn that light on when it gets dark and stormy, right? The second thing, or the second truth, I have realized that succumbing to stress and its negative effects on my health had the potential to prevent me from enjoying the benefits of my hard work and achievements. Because forget what you heard, stress kills. It doesn't make you Or,
Mhm.
all right. There's that narrative. What doesn't kill you make you strong. Nah.
Mhm.
Stress kills. So we have to remember the objective is to move our personal needles from coping and
Mm.
surviving to striving and
Yeah.
thriving. So in
Yeah.
essence, I learned to prioritize my happiness
Mhm.
and made time for that happiness. As all the effort I put into my endeavors would be in vain if I just allowed stress to jeopardize my well being and ultimately my ability to savor the rewards of my heart. Wow. Finally, countering and overcoming acts of marginalization involved in in my Christian communities, because
Mhm.
faith is definitely a part of,
Mm.
and whatever that faith is a
Mhm.
part of overcoming. But in my case, it's a Christian faith. And we like to refer to this task as taking up your cross,
Mhm.
right? And we talk to it, right?
Mhm.
Advocating for my worth, meaning you don't see it, but I'm going to tell you about it.
Mm.
It has been an ongoing process, one that I haven't been successful at all the time. And I struggle with it even after the doctorate, right? Because
Mhm.
earning your entrance into the academy is one thing, making your place in the
Oh
academy
yeah.
is another,
Yes, it
right?
is.
So it's imperative to assert oneself and to communicate the value of one's contributions, especially in environments where exclusion is prevalent. And unfortunately, while not just limited to higher education, because
Mm.
this struggle is not just happening here, it just so happens to be the place that I am in. Um, there's a narrative emerging across industries regarding Black women
Mm.
and that sense of space, um, that unfortunately can be found in higher education, but is also, frankly, swept out of the immediate conscious.
Mm.
Like we are sweeping it under a rug because it's easier to hide it than it is to confront it. So my advocacy, even when it fell flat, um, has not only contributed to a broader awareness of the importance of recognizing and valuing the diversity of voices in academia, um, that are not as fortunate as I was to have these certain things in place. And so, despite it taking me 10 years, I can't imagine not having complete the doctorate. And I would say to anyone that is getting ready to do it,
Mhm.
anyone who's considering it, if if you feel that that's the way you want to go for it.
Yes.
Do not allow these self-deprecating thoughts, and do not allow the voices of others to interfere with that pursuit, because unfortunately there are going to be some people who do it,
Mhm.
whether it's out of envy,
Mhm.
whether it's out of just not acknowledging who you are, or again going back to race, gender, and heritage, who just
Mhm.
believe that you're not capable. You're going to have to believe that you are capable.
Well
And
said.
so
Thank you for that, Dr. Laura. One of the
yeah,
elements of, before we wrap up, I want to call out is, I hope this echoes really well for others to listen to, is that your inherent worth and value. When you said that, it really just resonated to my soul to hear you speak to that. And you gave our listeners and subscribers the gift of your wisdom and your journey, your experience of advocacy, mentorship, allyship, really holding space for self and for others like you, recognizing that this is part of a legacy that's bigger than one person, and that those who have achieved before us have set some pavement and some pathways that we can identify, right? And how we connect through that. I think you've really brought all that to light, and it's really inspiring. So I want to have all of our listeners today who are going to benefit, or whenever they listen to this podcast episode, get the benefit of leveraging what you shared. It's a true gift to learn from your experience. And I saw you go through that 10-year journey, that marathon, and I'm so proud of you. And I'm so proud to be able to witness it and see you go through the developmental experience and growth and learning. And you also made a good point too about the stresses, that just coping and surviving is not suffice.
right,
We also need more Black women and people who are dealing with the exclusion and the stress of intersectionality to acknowledge that mental health care is health care, right? There
Right.
are professionals, clinicians, there are of all different professions, whether it's in healthcare, primary medical to mental health care, that you deserve. You're inherently worthy of getting the health care that you deserve. So I want to put that message out there as well. So thank you again to my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Laura, for sharing her experiences, her valuable insights, her professional perspective in academia and also just in the world in general, socioeconomically, and what that looks like for her. I want to thank all of you for joining this MindSolve podcast episode, investing your valuable time listening and learning more about how the intersection of identity can be a cause for stress, but you can overcome it. You want to add something else there, Dr. Laura?
Oh, yes, definitely. I want to talk a little bit about some recommendations, some
Yes,
resources,
yes,
and maybe
yes.
some organizations um, that others may find helpful.
Okay.
So, um, look, it's just important to seek out communities and resources that
Mm,
understand and cater to your specific needs and
mm,
experiences. So I'm going to start my recommendations from the generalized to the specific,
mhm,
commencing first with the American Psychological Association.
mhm,
Like I mentioned, you know, or maybe I didn't quite get a chance to mention this, I apologize, but there is an ongoing initiative in the APA
mhm,
to see exclusion in professional spaces addressed. Another association is the NAACP,
mhm,
right? As an organization, it endeavors to advance interracial justice initiatives for African Americans. To become more specific, professionally speaking, there's also the Black Executive Network. It's
mhm,
a public LinkedIn group, and this organization consists of Black professionals who often share events that are happening
mhm,
in other organizations that is responsive to the current or aspiring Black exec. The Association of Black Women in Higher Education, of which I am considering future
mm,
membership, their primary mission is to promote the intellectual growth and education development of Black women in higher education with a motto that is lift as we climb.
mm,
So, what better group to consider joining,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
There is the Black Network. You can find them on IG at Black BLK space ED, pardon. We're located in Baltimore. Their focus is narrowing the racial leadership gap for
mhm,
non for Black nonprofit executive directors. And many of our HEIs are nonprofit organizations. So you can make the case that there will be conversations relevant to professional Black women. Most recently, I've had the opportunity to become a world record holder, right? So
mhm,
this effort was led by Jen Franks uh, Ahagatu, and you can find the group on Facebook. It's Black Women World Record. And the objective of this group was to put on world display the achievement of Black women by showing the most amount of Black women with a graduation
mm,
certificate uploaded to social media within 24 hours. And since our combined success in achieving the extreme world record under Jen's leadership, the group has evolved to Black women just celebrating ourselves. So I encourage interested listeners, particularly Black
mhm,
women and our allies, to join that conversation and see the beauty of what happens when Black women congregate. Along that same vein, you know, we've got to find places where we congregate. I
mhm,
mentioned my D9 affiliation, and while there is a selection process to join these graduate organizations directly, they also host public community events. So find a local chapter of your favorite D9 sorority or fraternity for the guys who may be listening and attend those events that, as they are more likely to gear to those public opportunities of conversations around mental health and
mhm,
professional advancement of Black and Brown women. We also estimate other places outside of academia that support intellectual curiosity. So within the last month, by virtue of my location in Chocolate City, also known as Washington, D.C., I've had fabulous networking opportunities at the National Museum for African American Art, where Ayanna V. Jackson's art exhibited on the myth and legend of Drexia has reinvigorated my Afrofuturistic lens. And this was alongside my visit to the National Museum for African American History and Culture, where a panel included Yatasha L. Womack, whose book, which I have with me, Post Black: How a New Generation is Redefining African American Identity, is a classic in the making. So if you haven't already done it, please be sure to buy it. With that mention, I'm going to briefly segue because I know I'm over time, JB.
Yeah, we're coming up at our time, but this is good.
But I want to segue into some other resources I have found illuminating as I continue to navigate higher ed as an Afro-Caribbean woman. First up, Ebony and Ivory: Race, Slavery, and the Troubled History of America's Universities, which orients us to how the systemically inequitable landscapes of higher education came to be. Futurism teaches that you have to know where you were to know where you're going. So along that same vein, there is nothing like the 1619 Project. It is a must-have in every conversation involving re-envisioning our Afro-American futures. And it starts at the beginning, whereas Ebony and Ivy starts at about the Civil War. Then a little more risque, A Women's Guide to Power Unbound by Cassia Urbiak. And the risque, controversial aspects of this book doesn't stem from the content, but rather from the writer herself, as Cassia is drawing upon her experience as a dominatrix in BDSM to teach women how to be more assertive and stand in their power and truth. To wrap it up, because I know we're ready to go and your listeners are probably, last 3 books. As you can see, I'm a prolific and diverse reader.
Oh, yes, I know that about you.
Black Fatigue: How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit. At many junctures in our conversation, I have spoken about exhaustion. Mary Frances Winters offers solutions to protect our minds from that fatigue threatening to consume our power. And then there's the Racial Battle: Fatigue in Higher Education, Exposing the Myth of Post-Racial America. It is an intriguing collection that highlights all the struggles associated with operationalized and weaponized racism in everyday academic life. And then finally, remember that shadow work I was talking about? There's a guide for that. Dr. Carrie Yazid's workbook, Unbreak My Soul: How Black Women Can Begin to Heal from Workplace Trauma, is a place from which to start your healing and reclaiming of who you are and everything that you're worth. And so with that, I hope I've given your listeners somewhere to begin.
Yes. Those were gems. You just did like what we would call on around the cipher bars of recommendations. I love it. And we know that we both have quite the collection of books. So we could take 3 hours just going through each of our books in our library. So we won't do that for our listeners this time. But thank you so much. Dr. Laura. These are great gems. I'm hopeful that we have a lot of listeners take in all this feedback and insights and the recommendations of the books and resources there. I want to also invite all of our listeners of the MindSoft podcast to subscribe to the podcast on your choosing platform. It's Mind_Solve. You can also find us on YouTube, on the YouTube channel that we have, to stay up to speed on upcoming episodes like this great episode with Dr. Laura. Please like and share this podcast with others you believe can benefit from this great information from Dr. Laura that she shared. And remember to be mindful and to choose joy. And with that, I wish you the wellness. Warm regards, Dr. Jonathan. Thank you.